Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Family Lawyer podcast. Today we're talking about the challenge of recognising cases of domestic abuse where couples or where people are going through mediation. We're specifically talking about a new protocol, a new framework, some support that is being given to mediators around this subject. I'm delighted to introduce Mike Mack, CEO of the Family Mediation Trust, and Lorraine Bramwell, an accredited family mediator, to the discussion. In the first instance, I wonder if you both, and Mike first, I wonder if you both might give a bit of an introduction to listeners to who you are and what you do, please.
Yeah, welcome. It's nice to be here. I'm the CEO of the Family Mediation Trust, and I've been doing that role for about 6 years. I'm not a family mediator myself, but I have a team of about 6 to 10 family mediators who work every day delivering mediation across the country. But I also sit on the Family Mediation Council Standards Board and the Legal Services Consumer Panel. So I'm very much looking at how people get access to the support they need as they go through their separation.
Thanks so much, Mike. And Lorraine?
As you said, I'm an accredited family mediator. I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm also have been involved for a number of years with the training of family mediators. So I run one of the FMC recognised foundation training courses for mediators, both looking at initial training but also at ongoing training as well. And I also work as a professional practice consultant. I have a particular interest in the issue of domestic abuse, particularly in relation to mediation. And for that reason, I'm on the Family Mediation Standards Board, but also on the Domestic and Child Abuse Panel, which has been looking specifically at this issue.
I think we're setting the scene nicely here. Mike, tell us about the work of the Family Mediation Trust and particularly how you interact with family practitioners.
Yeah, so the Family Mediation Trust has been delivering family mediation for 41 years. It's one of the oldest charities in the country doing so. We're a charity. We're there to try and both make sure that people get the help they need, the support they need, but also we've got a wider remit, which is to try and challenge and explore the whole world of family mediation and how we can make it better, how we can make it stronger and more effective. Really, we come at these kind of challenges. We look to make sure that every client, from the lowest income all the way through to sort of high net worth families, are getting the help they need, but also that we're looking for ways to improve not only our service, but the sector as a whole. So we'd also run training and support, and we put on conferences and debates on the topics around mediation as well.
And specifically for the purposes of the podcast and what we're going to go on and talk about, you guys have provided some grant funding to enable some further work to be done on how we can better screen domestic abuse in the context of mediation.
We got to the point where we were looking at the challenges going on in the mediation world, and we could see that one of those challenges was accessing the right consistent domestic abuse support. We were also in a fortunate place where through our team's hard work, we do have a small surplus, and we decided to allocate some of that to challenging the sector to come up with some credible ways forward. After that process, we received a number of applications and got to the point where we were able to select, or 3 of our trustees were able to select, the FMC's project as a viable solution. So yeah, we've been fortunate to take that money and use it to the good of the industry.
So let's move into the sort of the meat of the discussion here, Lorraine. And the summation here, rightly or wrongly, is that currently domestic abuse screening is not effective or is not particularly efficient. Perhaps that might be a fairer description, and certainly not standardized as it stands. Is that fair?
I think there's probably a bit more to it than that, to be fair. The whole issue of the complexities around mediation where domestic abuse is an issue has been around for many years. I mean, I was involved in stuff right back in the 1990s when the very first sort of screening and resource pack was, I co-wrote it with support from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And that really came out of concerns at the time that there was a risk potentially to people who were in abusive relationships if it wasn't picked up in mediation, in terms not only of safety, but also of making sure that the arrangements that were made in mediation were in fact fair and ones that both people felt were right for them and their children. So it's been something there's been a lot of work done for many years. The different sort of professional bodies involved in family mediation have all in different ways looked at how that can be developed, how they can make sure that their mediators are trained and understand some of the issues around this. And indeed, both the Family Mediation Council and its predecessor, the UK College of Family Mediators, had standards and guidance and codes of practice in place around all of this, both in terms of practice, but also in terms of training. So in many ways, for most mediators, having a good understanding of the issues around domestic abuse and mediation is something that's expected of all of us. But I think that what we have felt is that firstly, it's important not to rest on your laurels and just assume everything's okay. But I think more importantly, there was a need to bring together all these different approaches and ideas that have developed over the years into something as a sort of a resource that all FMC mediators could use and work to, which was specifically developed to enable mediators to check carefully for signs of domestic abuse and coercive control, also to look at the suitability of mediation for that, because it's not a black and white. If there's any domestic abuse, then mediation is automatically unsuitable. It's much more complex than that. And so one of the things that mediators have to do is to get a really good understanding of the impact of any abuse on people's ability to take part equally in mediation, as well as the practicalities of the safety of it. Also, if it is looking like it might be suitable and something that people want to try, what would need to be in place to ensure that that mediation was going to be conducted in a way that was safe and fair. It is very much a sort of a development and a bringing together, I think, of work that's gone on for years. And in most cases, I would hope that most mediators are doing this routinely anyway. But, you know, there will always be situations where people have not been as careful as they should have been. And so this resource, hopefully, again, and the training that will go with it, will ensure that we've got a more uniform approach across all of our registered mediators.
Mike, domestic abuse is increasingly a catch-all phrase, and it covers a multitude of scenarios. And the other thing that strikes me here, and we've done podcasts about this as well, is the changing nature of domestic abuse, the increase, for example, in technology. And one of the things that came up in a previous podcast was the use of something like a Ring doorbell, which to most of us is very innocuous, but to those in relationships where there's elements of coercive control are actually, you know, a real danger to them. So is there an element here where we need to be looking at the changing nature of domestic abuse and update our guidance for mediators as well?
I think it's a really big bit, is that the whole world is changing. We are probably one of the very few professions where we see both the victim and perpetrator, and we don't know which order we're going to see them in. So we need to be able to adapt to that. I know within the Family Mediation Trust, about 40% of our clients come in with their domestic abuse within those relationships. So it's about trying to make sure, firstly, we don't do any more harm That's a really big starting point for all of us. But then once we've got through that bit of the jigsaw, is what tools can we put in place to manage that case, to give each party that equal opportunity to make that decision, because it does enable those parties to keep their control and to make those decisions. So that's a really important bit, is how do we do that? And that's where the tool hopefully will start to give us some consistency in answers to that, because every mediator has their own levels of where they would say yes and where they will say no and how they work. I know within our team we've got a variation of confidence and ability to assess really high conflict cases. So what we're trying to always do is work out the best way forward, and this tool we hope will do that. I want to sort of also add, one of the things that jumped out to me was the reason why I wanted the tool to really come forward was I was at the National Local Family Justice Conference and talking to the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and she made it very clear that she said, I know you guys do a really good job of domestic abuse screening, but you don't have a formalised system. And until you have that, you can't be in those conversations with us about it. We need to get something which we can rely on. So it's more a perception issue. I think it's a big bit about perception. Most people don't pick up that every MIAM will have a domestic abuse screening process within it. Every mediator will be doing domestic abuse training before they are qualified, and then also as they continue their accreditation through CBD. So we're already doing a lot, but actually we've got no way of actually proving that to the majority of people, and that's something that's really important here.
I think that's a very valid point. I think the risk here is that we're suggesting that what we're doing is wrong. I don't think that's what you guys are saying. What you're saying is that broadly speaking, we're in a good place with this, but as ever, Lorraine, it's about not resting on our laurels. What can we improve then, Lorraine? What are we not getting quite as right as some of the other stuff?
Well, I think, as Mike said, it to some degree, it's more about a consistency of approach. I think one of the big problems has been that whilst there are a number of tools out there for assessing domestic abuse and its occurrence, severity, all of those things, mediators are in a fairly unique position, because whilst it's important that we know those things, what we also need to know is what's the relevance of this in terms of people's ability to take part on an equal basis in mediation. And that is something that it's very difficult to just have a sort of a tick box for. And what is required really is for mediators to have the skill and sort of questions and also sort of the ability to follow through on different questions and answers to really get a sense of instances of domestic abuse that may be disclosed. Firstly, how to ask in a way that people feel able and comfortable to tell you, but then when they ask you is, where do you go next with this? And it's about understanding more about it, understanding what the impact has been on that person, but also if they are going to then go on to mediation, given that impact, A, is it safe? And B, if they were going to, what could be put in place to enable them to be able to take part on a more equal basis and do it safely? But if it isn't, rather than just saying to people, well, thank you for telling me, I'm sorry, we can't help, and they may have been, you may have been the first person they've told, is to be able to direct them towards other services and types of support so that they can get the help they need. I mean, as somebody who, before I was a mediator, worked with families where domestic abuse was an issue, I think that was one of the hardest things for people, is it was really hard to tell somebody about what's going on at home. And when they finally do, if that professional then says, well, there's nothing I can do to help you, I think that's even harder and makes it doubly hard then for them to tell anybody else. So it is really important that mediators know what to ask, what to do, assess whether it's suitable or not, and what would need to be in place. But if it isn't, what else can be put in place? What other support do people need? I think really what we're hoping to do is just sort of consolidate that a bit more with this resource to enable mediators to do that as effectively as possible.
That's what we're hoping the screening tool is going to achieve. Do we understand what the sort of practical elements of that might look like? Appreciating that obviously it's very early stages of development at the moment.
Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, as you say, it's fairly early stages at the moment, but what I would expect it to include is some guidance as to the types of questions that mediators need to ask. And I think there needs to be almost like a range of questions so that you can approach it from slightly different angles. So it's not just a tick box exercise. I mean, there may be questions that we would automatically ask, but I think there also needs to be a bit more to it than that. To make it sensitive to what you're dealing with, there needs to be stuff around what mediators should be looking out for in the answers that people give as well, because the kind of thing that sometimes you hear as a mediator is, oh yes, well that happened, but if I just come back on time, or I just got dinner on time, or whatever, it's my fault. There, what you'll get an indication of is somebody who has been ground down over a number of years, perhaps, and to the point where they actually think it's their fault that these things are happening. And again, people in that situation will be very often saying, I want to try mediation. I think this is the best way for me to go. But then in the next breath are taking responsibility for things that they absolutely shouldn't be taking responsibility for in terms of the way they're being treated. And so you need to sort of start to assess there, actually, is this person in a position where they would be able to hold their own in a conversation with the other party? If not, then does it make it unsuitable, or are there other options open to them, such as shuttle mediation, doing it virtually? All kinds of possibilities there. So there are ways around it sometimes, but even then, for some people who've been in an abusive relationship, particularly over a long time, whatever you put in place, they're not going to actually feel able to say what they really want and feel, or indeed may not be safe if they did. So you really need to know what to ask, and also looking very carefully at the answers as well. I think there's stuff around doing this sensitively as well, because what you don't want to do, you need to ask some questions and understand what's going on, but you don't want to sort of drag people back through the trauma they've already been through. Our aim is never to ensure we're not making matters worse, I think, as Mike has said. So how you ask is really important, and how much you need to ask. I think the last thing is knowing what to do next. So if we are proceeding, what should be in place, what should you be checking for, both in terms of actual safety, but also inability to take part on an equal basis. Or if you're not going ahead, what else can be offered, what other support is out there, how you can convey that to the person involved. Support and encourage them, if need be, to seek help rather than just walk out and carry on living with what they have been.
The only thing that, from our point of view, which is a bit of a challenge that we face that a lot of others don't, is because we do a lot of legal aid work. Low-income families have a very few options around them, and their knowledge and understanding of the legal support and what they can get is limited, and they might be living in legal support deserts as well, so that actually getting legal advice might be very challenging. Mediation is often one of the starting points they've got, and actually it's that, or it's in person in court, and that's quite a challenging position for them. So we're hoping that this tool gives us some tools and ability to work closer with some of those families where they don't have that sort of range of support that other people can access easily. So I think that's going to be quite interesting how we implement this tool into those kind of relationships.
I wholeheartedly accept that the scope of the grant needs to cover an element of education, as you've sort of mentioned there, Mike. But just to give listeners an idea of the scale of this challenge, you were telling me that the proportion of cases that come to you where there's an intonation of domestic abuse is astonishingly high.
We've been mapping it within our own work, and we believe it's about 40% of our cases include an element of domestic abuse. And there's a couple of things to remember here. One is that domestic abuse is a complete range from very low level, and it might be purely around the conflict over a separation period, that's one-off or two-off in nature, all the way through to very embedded behaviour that is at a level that a mediator will never get involved with. And then there will be supporting people into legal advice and counselling and so forth. So we get a very broad range of the things that come to us. And the other thing to remember is we will get both the perpetrator and the victim coming forward. So very often we might get one client turning up and they are saying there are court cases, there is this or that going on, and there's been allegations against me to my ex-partner. So we're seeing both sides of this coin coming forward. So yeah, there's a lot of it. It's part of our society, and it's surprisingly and scary how big a part of our society it is.
And just to say as well, though, that that is consistent, I think, with other mediation services. I mean, and for a number of years as well, when we've been seeing, sort of 1 in 3 cases, things like that. So for a long time. So I don't think it's on the rise or anything, although I think there's more awareness now than perhaps there was. But it is always been there, always.
I sometimes think that standardizing something or creating a protocol or whatever it might be can straitjacket professionals' discretion and create barriers where there may not need to be. Is that the case here, do you think?
One of the beauties, perhaps, hopefully, of this resource is that that's something that needs to be taken into account in its development, is that when a mediator meets somebody at a MIAMS meeting and they're doing this assessment as part of the wider discussions about whether mediation is going to be the best way forward for them, it is a conversation. And part of the skill of the mediator is to take some of the questions and guidance that will be in this resource and weave them into a more natural conversation about the situation, how things have been in the past, and any concerns that people have now. And so that hopefully the resource will help with that, but it's also down to the skills of the mediator to actually do that, and that is what mediators do.
We're moving towards the end of the time we have for the discussion, and I wanted to touch on what the impact of the changes to the family procedure rules last year have had on mediation in general, and then more specifically the impact that it has here. Because if the volume of cases that you're seeing that have domestic abuse intonation is as high as it is, as we've discussed, and you're going to get more cases because that's the direction of travel, this becomes a bit of a capacity issue for you, or there are other unintended consequences here?
So last year, as we all know, the family procedure rules changed. That meant mediation was a lot higher on the list of priorities. It was something that we're going to see a lot more of. Now, it's taken a few months to bed in. We're now starting to see a lot more cases come to us and referred from court back to us as well. So we're already starting to see people choosing mediation, and not just choosing it, but wanting to give it a proper good go, which is, from our point of view, absolutely brilliant. But that does create the challenge of new work coming at us, increased conflict within the cases we're working with. So we're going to see an increase in some of these challenges. And we're starting to see initiatives like Norfolk. We've got a local directive come out from the courts saying that MIAMS should be used in all cases, and really pushing that momentum. This tool hopefully will give us all a bit of reassurance that when we get cases come to us, or we get these higher conflict cases, it will give us some ability to manage those better. And that's something we know. We're getting more cases sent to us from court. We know some of those have got identified domestic abuse scenarios within them, and we have to make our own independent assessment of suitability. It's very hard to do that if we haven't got a formal tool. So we think this tool will help us to get that formal structure, enabling us to make the right decision when we're getting these cases coming out of the court arena.
I think what it means, as well, as I was saying, was that it is imperative, with so many more people coming to us, that we do ensure that we are assessing carefully as to whether mediation is suitable or not. Mediation works really well in a vast majority of cases, but we've always been very clear that it's not right in every case. And so mediators need to have the confidence, and hopefully this tool will help with that, to be able to say where it's not suitable, this isn't the right time for mediation, and to be able to also ensure that those who have had the opportunity in a MIAMS meeting, perhaps for the first time, to tell somebody what's actually been happening, to at least get the support they need, whereas perhaps if they hadn't had that conversation, that wouldn't be available to them either.
So to wrap up, when can we expect this tool to start being in development? We've talked about its early stages already, and timeframes around progress, Mike.
So we were really pleased that the FMC were able to come forward because they'd done a lot of this work on developing the idea and the where they wanted to take it. So we should get momentum really quickly. There are some workshops coming up in May for mediators and for domestic abuse practitioners to get involved to help shape the tool. And I think the aim is to really get this out in time for the FMC's 10-year conference in late September. So we should have something in a good position by then. That's when we'll start to see the training rolling out across the industry.
It's unusual to see quite such tight timescales, and hopefully we can stick to those. It's an important topic, and I'm very, very grateful to both Mike and Lorraine for joining the podcast today. So thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
It's been good to be here.
The Today's Family Lawyer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk. My thanks to Mike and to Lorraine. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Family Lawyer podcast, the leading source of daily news and insight for family law practitioners in England and Wales. Sign up to our free weekly newsletter at todaysfamilylawyer.co.uk and subscribe to hear all the latest news and views from across the family law sector. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.